tribe.
Okay, welcome,
right.
folks. We're moving to a different study today. It comes from a you'll get through this. It's another one of Max Lucado's books. If you're interested, you can pick the book up. Mine arrived about 2 hours ago, so fortunately I had the Bible references to make use of, and I got a quick read of the first chapter and a half of the book, which really is what the first thing seems to be about. So I should be pretty good that way. But it's typical Max Lucado. If you've read and studied him before, you might enjoy that. The scriptures that we'll use each week were in the newsletter. So if you have that or still have it, you can go back and check that for each week, and that would be helpful because it's always good if we've read ahead of time. But as my penchant, I always like to read the scripture together. So are one of you willing to get out a Bible or your computer or whatever and read? Actually, I need 2 volunteers today. At least 2 volunteers.
Is this Genesis 38 we're doing?
Yes, it was, no, 37.
Oh, how'd that work out?
Genesis 37, verses 1 to 24. If somebody's willing to read that or at least share the reading of that.
I have it if you want.
Okay, hold that thought, Lynn. And then I need a volunteer to read a short piece from Genesis chapter 50. Somebody want to volunteer to that?
I'll read that, Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Genesis chapter 50, verses 19, 20, and 21. Okay, so it was Lynn that said she had it, right?
Did you say through 24?
Yes, it's a little bit of an unusual place to stop, but that's what they tell us.
Okay. So this is Genesis 37, 1 through 24. And it's titled Joseph's Dreams. I'm reading it from NIV. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made him an ornate robe. He made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then the next section is Joseph sold by his brothers. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it.
Thank you. And Sandy, this is from later, notably later in the story. In fact, it's kind of near the end of the story. It's when the brothers show up in Egypt and
Right.
have to appear before Joseph, who's now in great place and authority. And this is some of what Joseph says to them. Sandy?
Okay, 50, and then verse 19. But Joseph said to them, this is Joseph reassures his brothers. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them.
Thank you. Now, as we've heard the story and heard the word, we'll turn on to Max and let him share some with us, and then we'll come back to kind of unpeel layers of this passage of scripture. So, Pastor Scott, if you can bring up the video for us.
Yep, we're gonna get it right now.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
She had a tremble about her, the kind of tremble that you feel when you place a hand on someone's shoulder.
No video,
I ran
Pastor.
into her, of all places, in the grocery store. Asked her how she was doing, how her kids were, about her husband. And that's when her eyes began to fill with tears, her chin began to quiver, and that's when the story spilled out. He had left her, traded her in on a newer model. She didn't think she was going to make it. And so the produce section became a sanctuary of sorts, and I prayed for her. And I placed my hand on her shoulder and I said, you're going to get through this. It won't be painless, won't be quick. But God is going to use this mess for something really, really good. In the meantime, don't be foolish and don't be naive. But don't despair either, because with God's help, you're going to get through this. Just a couple of days later, I got a call from a friend.
Does anybody have video?
No,
Been laid off at work. It was his fault.
No,
Made some
you guys don't
tacky
have video?
remarks, inappropriate.
No.
No video.
Okay, let me see. Should be on.
Yeah, it should be.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
He's upset with himself, and
You see it
he
now?
needed some assurance. And so
No.
No.
I said, you'll get through this.
Nope, nothing.
Won't be
Okay.
painless, won't be quick, but God will use this mess for something good.
I'm gonna stop share here. Hmm.
Story was pretty painful
See
as
it
well,
now?
even for a teenager.
No?
Only 16 years of age, her
Huh.
parents are divorcing. And when they brought her the news of the divorce, they brought her the news that she needs to choose.
We can listen. We could just
Maybe,
listen.
Kevin, maybe I can make myself the host again, and maybe that's,
That might be the problem.
yeah, well, let's see if we can do
Can
this.
you
here.
do that, or do I need to do something?
Make me the host,
Where do I do that? Let me see. Hold on.
where it says participants.
You have to find a participant. Scott. How do I do make host? There it is. Yes. Okay, let's try it again. I did that.
Let's see. You see it?
No.
No video?
No.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Life comes with challenges. If you've got a pulse, then you've got a few problems. It's just part of life. We're either coming out of a crisis, in the middle of a crisis, or headed toward a crisis.
Pastor, we could just listen to it.
I'll try to get it while we're listening to it.
Okay, keep it going then. At this point, Pastor Scott, I just have you on camera.
Okay.
You have to hit your tiles.
It won't be painless, it won't be quick, but God will use this mess for good. In the meantime, don't be foolish or naive, but don't despair either. With God's help, I will get through this. What audacity! How dare we make such a claim? Where do we come up with this thought? Well, actually, I came across this in a pit. A pit, a steep, dark pit, so steep and so deep that the boy could not get out. And had he been able to climb out, his brothers would have pushed him back in anyway. It was their idea that he was in the pit. The story is in Genesis chapter 37. And with these words, we are introduced to the calamity of Joseph. Verses 23 and 25. And so it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. And they took him and they cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. So it was an abandoned cistern. We can imagine it with the roots growing out of the side and the jaggedy rocks, maybe even at the bottom. And were we able to peer over into the bottom of the pit, there we would see the boy. At least he appears to be a boy. He's only 17 years old. He's got a downy beard. He's got spindly legs and arms. His hands are bound. His ankles are tied. He's on his side. There's spit in the sand where he's drooled. His voice is hoarse from shouting and screaming, but no one's listening to him. It's not that the brothers couldn't hear him. It's just that they chose not to hear him. Some 2 decades later, they will give this confession. We saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. We would not hear. Who are these brothers? Well, they're the great-grandsons of Abraham. They're the sons of Jacob. They are the ones after whom the tribes are going to be named. In fact, in the book of Revelation, we are told that their names are engraved in the foundation of the city gates to the New Jerusalem. So this is as close as the Bible gets to royalty. These are the Kennedys of their day. This is a famous family. But this day, this is a family in crisis. This is the Bronze Age version of a dysfunctional family. They could have their own reality TV show, for crying out loud. They hate their brother. They hate their brother so much that they're throwing him in a pit, and then they're saying, okay, let's just go eat lunch. Just go eat lunch. While he's screaming, they're passing the French fries. They're just eating lunch, oblivious, hard-hearted, oafish, resistant, insensitive. Here's why. Their father Jacob pampered Joseph like Joseph was a prized calf. He was the son of Rachel. Now, Jacob had 2 wives, but he really just had one love. And when Rachel, his love, died, he kept the memory of Rachel alive by fawning over Joseph, their son. He was the first of 2 sons that they would have. And so he just pretended that Joseph was his favorite. He didn't pretend it. He made Joseph his favorite son. It's a classic case of the problems of favoritism. And what he gave to Joseph, he didn't give to the other brothers. Joseph stayed home. They went out and worked. Joseph got his own room. They had to share a dormitory. Joseph got his own car. They had to ride a bicycle. Joseph got a tunic of many colors. They got hand-me-down clothes. It was favoritism. And consequently, the brothers hated Joseph. I mean, they didn't just dislike him. But several times in the first chapter, we read they hated him. They hated him. They hated him. They could not speak peaceably about him. So finally, when they caught Joseph 60 miles away from Daddy's protection, they just decided to put an end to him once and for all, and they dumped him over the edge of the pit. They stripped the tunic off of him, and they threw him over the edge of the pit. These are defiant verbs. In fact, we get the impression that they were happy for the boy to die, except for the fact that they saw an opportunity to make some money. And since their desire for money was just a little stronger than their desire for blood, they saw a chance to sell him, and they sold him into slavery. Now, Joseph didn't see this assault coming. He didn't wake up that morning and think, I better put on my padded clothing because this is the day I get dumped in a pit. This attack caught him off guard, and so did yours. It always does. It catches us off guard. Now, Joseph's attack came in the form of a cistern. Yours came in the form of a diagnosis or a traumatic injury or a foster home. Joseph was thrown into the pit and abandoned. Maybe you were, thrown into the unemployment line and forgotten. Thrown into divorce court and betrayed, or even thrown into a bed and abused. Joseph is not the first and he's not the last to have a story that begins in a pit. And maybe that's where you are. Maybe if you were to describe your situation right now, you would say, I'm just at the bottom of a hole. And as you look, you don't see any easy exit. You think the walls are steep. You don't know how you'll get out. I'm sure Joseph felt the same. You see, Joseph's story got worse before it got better. The abandonment led to enslavement, entrapment, and imprisonment. He was sucker punched. He was sold out. He was mistreated. Time and time again, people made promises to him that they didn't keep. They offered gifts only to take them back. If hurt were a swampland, Joseph was sentenced to life in the Everglades. Yet Joseph never gave up. He never gave up. There are many people who have challenges come into their lives, many people in the Bible who face challenges. And yet the story of Joseph stands out because here's a guy who never got bitter. He never let his anger metastasize into and to hatred. He never let his heart get hard. There was something about Joseph's story that enabled him not just to survive, but also to thrive. You've noticed this, that every stage of his life, Joseph was promoted to the top of the class. Yeah, he's sold into slavery, but then he's put over Potiphar's household. Yeah, he's thrown into the prison, but next thing we know, he's in charge of the prison. Yeah, he's taken in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, hey, you're going to be my prime minister. And by the end of his life, Joseph, this boy in the pit, is the prince in the palace, and he's over the distribution of food in one of the most difficult times in human history. It's not hyperbole to state that Joseph saved his generation from starvation. How would you like that on your resume? You know, Joseph, Prince of Egypt, graduate of the University of Hard Knocks, saved the world. Pretty impressive for a kid whose story that begins down in the pit. So how did he do this? How did he do this? But we don't have to speculate. He gave us the answer. Many years later, when the roles have been reversed and the brothers are the ones in trouble and Joseph is the one in charge, the brothers come to Joseph pleading for mercy because they're afraid that they are going to end up in a pit of Joseph's making. But Joseph tells them this. He says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to preserve many people alive. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Now, that word meant, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. This is a word that comes out of the Hebrew language that means to weave something. If you were to weave a tapestry, you might use this verb. Joseph says, okay, you came weaving evil, taking the threads of evil and weaving them together. But God took those same threads and rewove it into a tapestry of something good. You brought evil into my life, but God rewove it into something good. Satan is the source of this evil. And his logic is simple. If he can destroy the family of Abraham, well, he can destroy the lineage of Jesus Christ. And so he comes in weaving evil. He wants to destroy the family of Abraham, the sons of Jacob. But God takes the very actions of evil, reweaves them in such a fashion that he promotes one of the sons of Jacob to be prime minister so that the family is not destroyed, just the opposite. They are placed in a protective place in Egypt with their brother on the throne. Who would have thought? What you intended as evil, Joseph said, God used for good to protect all of these people. You know the reason I think that Joseph's story is in the Bible? I think the reason that Joseph's story is in the Bible is to teach us that God can trump any evil in the world. There's nothing in the story of Joseph that would say there's no evil in the world. Evil is on every page. It's on every page, and there's evil on every corner of the world today. But every page of the story of Joseph, even every paragraph, every sentence in the story of Joseph tells us that God can take this evil that has come into your world and mine, and He can use it. He can reroute it. He can reweave it. He can repurpose it. He can recycle it. He can redeem it into something good. You're going to get through this. You are. You're going to get through this. We fear we won't. That's one of the challenges of tough times. We fear that the depression will never lift. We fear that the screaming will never stop. We fear that we'll never understand the pain. We fear we won't get through it. But you need to know, and I need to know, that through is one of God's favorite words. He gets us through the Red Sea. He gets us through the fiery furnace. He gets us through the storm. He gets us through even crucifixions. God can take that which appears to be evil, and He can get His people through. Deliverance is to the Bible what the Mardi Gras is to New Orleans. It's big, it's brassy, it's everywhere. God loves to get His people through things. Will it be painless? Have you wept your last tear? Have you gone through your last chemotherapy? Does God guarantee you'll never go to a cemetery? Or you'll never have a sleepless night? No. But He does guarantee that He'll be with you, and that He'll use that pain for something good. Will it be quick? I hope so. I hope so. I hope that next time you say a prayer, all your problems disappear. But experience has taught us otherwise, right? Sometimes it takes time. In fact, sometimes God takes His time. It seems we're always in a hurry. He took 120 years to get Noah ready for the flood, 40 years to get Moses ready for his assignment. He called a shepherd boy, David, to be king, but then He sent the shepherd boy back out to take care of the sheep for a few years. He called Saul to become an apostle, Paul, but before Saul became Paul, Saul had to go to Arabia for some special training. Sometimes God just takes His time, but He doesn't waste this time. He doesn't waste this time. And so this time in which you're waiting, God is using. God always uses time. He's never in a hurry. He's always on time. We're in a hurry and often late or early, but God is always on time. So if God is taking His time, that's okay. That's okay. God will use this mess. This mess. It feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, it feels like a perfect mess. We look at Joseph in the pit and we say, oh boy, what a perfect mess. But God looks at this and says, oh boy, what a perfect chance. Perfect chance to train and develop the future prime minister of Egypt. I don't know what all Joseph needed to learn, but God knew exactly what Joseph needed to learn. And part of that training came in the pit, part of it came in the house of Potiphar, part of that training came in the prison. But all of that was working together to create the kind of person that God was going to use to accomplish His will. Believe me, dear friend, God is working right now in this mess. He's working right now in this chaos, in this confusion. He's teaching you something that He wants you and I to know. He's training us for exactly what? I can't say, but God can. And He has you enrolled right now in a course that maybe you didn't volunteer for. It's assigned curriculum, right? He has assigned you this curriculum because He wants you to develop a characteristic or a skill that He can then use to further His kingdom. So you'll get through this. It feels like a mess, but He will use this mess for something good. So in the meantime, don't be foolish or naive. You're a sitting duck for stupid decisions right now, so you got to be careful. You got to stay faithful. You got to stay prayerful. But you got to keep believing. Hang on to hope. Hang on to hope. You got a parachute handed to you. God's presence. Put it on. Hang on to it. He's with you in this. God will use these tough times for something good. I want to be very clear. You are a Joseph in your generation. You carry something of God within you, something holy, something good, something positive, something encouraging. And Satan would love to neutralize you. But the story of Joseph is in the Bible to teach us that God trumps evil. And He rescued Joseph, and He's going to rescue you as well. Just be patient and just trust Him. Joseph would be the first to tell you that life in the pit stinks. But if there's one good thing about life in the pit, it's this: There's only one way to look. Look up. Look up. And the same God who reached in to help Joseph is the God who's going to reach in and help you.
So no one could get video at all?
No,
All right, I'll have to work on that. I don't know what happened there, but
Scott, we didn't need another license permission to show that video, did we?
no, I purchased it
Okay.
through actually Amazon. Yeah, I purchased it.
Okay, well,
Yeah, but to broadcast, you still may not be able to broadcast.
Oh, we have that. We have the license to broadcast.
Each one? Okay.
Yeah,
I
we
just-
do. We do.
Okay.
We have that.
Because I think
Okay.
that's what they monitor initially when you sign on.
Mhm.
I'm sure you are.
Yeah, we have that.
he was good listening to the story.
Yeah.
yes. Well, I'd like to take us through some of what he talked about in maybe a little more of a traditional Bible study method, but it's interesting as I made all these notes before I listened to the video. I have some notes from the video to wrap up our time, but I made all of these notes before that, thinking about the dysfunctional family. And that's what we have here. I've long thought, a lot of times we sit around and we think, where do people come up with these crazy plots for the soap operas, the daytime ones, the evening ones, for crazy movie plots? I've always thought they read the Bible. I mean, because, if you really think about it, just about everything at some place appears here. So there's a lot of dysfunction going on in this family. Some of it just because, some of it by very specific action. But what are some of the factors of the dysfunction in this family? So as you can think of them or as they make sense to you, just name them out there. Let's get them on the table.
I didn't realize that Joseph was the lineage of, who was his father? Jacob. Jacob.
Jacob's his father, Rachel's his mother.
And Rachel. And I mean, Jacob loved Rachel so much.
Mhm.
He worked 14 years for her or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well- Yep.
so that kind of shows sometimes what parents can do to a child.
Mm-hmm. Because this is his 11th son. Joseph is number 11. And, in a world that's supposed to be structured, oldest son this, youngest son that,
Right.
so, that'll really try to throw it out of kilter. So you have that. And there's a little more to what you said there, Sandy, but we'll let some other folks hopefully name them. What are some other components here?
Well, just the rivalry between the siblings
Right, and but where does that come from?
from favoritism.
Yeah,
Yep.
and these 12 brothers, they're all Jacob's sons, right?
Right, but not Rachel's.
Yes. How many mothers are there among the 12?
What is it,
Two.
4?
Four.
4.
Four.
2 legitimate and 2 illegitimate.
Well, it depends on how you look at that, I guess. But yeah, 6 of the boys
Mothers.
are Leah's sons. 2 each are
Oh, they're right.
Zilpah, Bilhah, and Rachel. So, we've got 4 mothers. And unless we make stereotypical jokes, we have 4 Jewish mothers. Probably. I don't know if the servant girls were Jewish or not, but we have 4 mothers, 12 sons. There's going to be some level of rivalry. Good, bad, or indifferent, there's going to be some. Okay, what else? You've alluded to working 14 years to get Rachel as his wife. Well, think about what Rachel's father did to Jacob.
I know. Even there was deception all around.
You know, Laban tricked Jacob
Right.
into marrying the older daughter first,
Yep.
who, now think about how you like to be Leah in that story, right? I get given to this guy as a bride. He doesn't love me. And quite frankly, he don't want me.
But she loved her sons. She loved her children. So
Yes,
she,
but, you
that
know,
was
so,
okay. That was okay if Jacob didn't love her. She wanted children and she got her children.
you know, all right, so we have all of that. Then you have Jacob. What does Jacob do to feed all this, to stoke this fire?
The favoritism.
Which
guess.
is manifested in the coat of many colors.
Yeah, that he has a
Right.
nice,
Yeah,
Yeah.
you had a nice long sleeved coat there going on.
I mean, you know, real fancy duds and really kind of unique and special. And
Yeah.
so Jacob kind of continues to nurture that. Now, you know, I like to think I wasn't born yesterday, you know, so
You weren't.
the reality is, yeah, ain't that the truth? Thanks a lot, Mom. Anyway, but the truth is, I don't know, is anybody out there an only child?
Oop.
Okay, then the truth of the matter is that in some way, shape, or form, we all relate a little bit more to mom or to dad than we did to the other one. There could be any number of reasons to this. I was remarking the other day to Melissa, we have friends, good friends, who have two sons who are fairly close in age, have a lot of things that they do and like similar, but some differences. But it's fascinating how one of them looks like dad, one of them looks like mom, and they behave like the parent they look like
Wow.
in large ways. Now, in some respects, if they're dividing up to go do a job around the house, who do you think pairs up? I mean, you know, it just works that way. I don't think that has anything to do with demonstrated preferences. It's just the personalities and how that works. So we all kind of know that. I mean, you know, that's just how that sort of works. And that's okay.
What
That's not,
does an only son do? If you're the only son, who did you pair up with? Mom and dad?
I don't know. I guess whoever, what I'm just saying is by the nature of people,
Right.
we connect to others. It actually has almost nothing to do with how much affection one has for them. I mean, I love some people dearly who I have like very limited affinity for and with. That's just the way it is. We are just very different people. And so you like that. But when you feed that like Jacob did here, you're going to have some huge problems. Now, Joseph doesn't help his circumstances. Because what's one of Joseph's gifts?
Bragging.
That's a great answer. That's what it comes out as. I don't know that that's what we would normally think of as the gift. But how does it demonstrate in the text that we read today?
He's tormenting his brothers with his dreams that he had.
The dreams. And his gift is that he has dreams and he has an ability to interpret them, right?
Yes.
That's a gift. Which he turns into bragging, which turns out, I bet he makes it a gift in a way. Because, you know, and I don't know, sometimes, actually, a whole lot of time. So I wish the Bible included a lot more of the story.
Yeah.
Because how does Jacob convey his dreams to his brothers? Hey guys, man, I can't even believe I had this dream. And man, you know, or is it, Na 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 na. Hey guys, guess what? You know, not only does Dad treat me better than you, but God says you're gonna bow down to me. And then then Joseph ups that ante with another dream by telling that to his mom and dad.
Yeah.
So, Joseph feeds into this stuff too about how incredibly special I am and how wonderful I am.
Well, they should have believed these dreams.
Yeah,
Well-
suppose Joseph was simply matter-of-factly saying, hey guys, I had a dream. And he's telling them about the dream. And because they already know he's the favored son, as he tells them about this dream, they're all thinking in the back of their minds, oh yeah, here he goes again.
Sure.
He thinks he's special because daddy said he's special.
Or, yeah, and it's like, oh, I had a dream and I was ruler over you.
Yeah. I used to tell my brother that he wasn't born, that he was an egg that rolled up to the back door. Come on.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right. And I would, at least on some occasions, I would teach this story that way and say, well, what if Joseph was just incredibly matter of fact about this?
What if he's just saying, hey guys, guess what I saw in my dream last night?
Yeah, and again, probably how that was heard and received is again connected to their past experience, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And maybe they thought he made it up too.
Or,
yeah.
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Good stories.
Well, yeah, well, if you frame it as a dream, it's hard for anybody to say you didn't have it, right?
Exactly.
I won't bore you with the whole story for a lot of reasons, but if you ever want to know over a cup of coffee, remember to ask me sometime, because it's a pretty funny story. I've had the occasion one night at staff meeting at camp, late night, sitting around a picnic table when the other counselor in my cabin was talking about a dream he had the night before. I was terrified as I listened because I had the exact same dream.
Wow.
Now, to tell you the truth, what that meant was that what we both dreamed one of our campers was doing, we were both so la gaga, half asleep, actually 90% asleep, 10% awake, we thought it was a dream. Turns out it was the truth. But in the waking up, once we were awake the next day, it felt like a dream. And this was like 40 years ago. I can remember it like it was last night. And Mark is sitting at the other end of the table talking about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I had the same dream, So in that case, Mark wasn't making it up. I wasn't making it up, but it wasn't a dream. It was real. But you're right. What if Joseph hadn't had it as a dream?
Right.
Maybe in the past he's played that game, or his brothers think he has. So all of these seeds build into this story, and it's like at some point you kind of look around and have to think and say, what did they think was going to happen? Well, Joseph, as the story goes on, sends the brother, sends Joseph is sent, not Joseph sends, Joseph is sent to go check on his brothers and make sure all's well and bring word back to Jacob. Keep in mind, earlier in the story, we're told how he tells tales to Jacob about his brothers. He's a tattletale. He's a snitch. Now, when he's really little, you kind of understand that, right? I mean, some kids are like the informers. They tell everything they know, and they tell them all the time. If you have a family, you want to know how dads know who the informer is? That's who mom always sends with them when they leave the house. That's how mom finds everything out. Send them with dad. Whatever they do, they'll come back. The informer will tell on them. Well, apparently Joseph is the informer, so he sends them to go check up on. Joseph carries out his task. He's diligent. He doesn't find them where he was told, but he finds somebody to inquire, finds out where they moved to. A really minor little thing here that I thought was, that's interesting. I really wouldn't want to build a theological doctrine around it, but he was sent to find them at Shechem. Does that name ring a bell for anybody? It's a place of worship.
Yep.
They're no longer there. They've moved somewhere else. So all this bad stuff to Joseph can happen somewhere away from the place of worship. I just thought that was a little interesting. Don't want to build a big deal about it. So the brothers hatch this plot. They're going to kill Joseph. Who comes to Joseph's rescue?
Reuben.
Reuben.
Who's Reuben's mother?
Don't remember.
Take a wild guess.
And Rachel.
No,
Leah.
Leah.
Wow.
Now, first of all, you have a 50-50 chance guessing there because Leah's the mother of 6 of the kids. Actually, your chances are a little better because you can take Jacob out. But it's Leah. So Leah, the wife who Jacob didn't want, really, got tricked into taking. It's her son who comes to the favorite's rescue. Nice little sidebar story. It's not that Reuben doesn't want to do something to Joseph, but he just can't bring himself to applaud and affirm killing him. Whether it's because Reuben has standards, whether it's because Reuben knows that this will make Dad heartbroken, whatever it is, Reuben doesn't want to do that. So Reuben gets credit for saving Joseph's life. It's also a part of God's plan, of course, because if Joseph dies right here and now, the future has some problems. So what they do is they take the symbol of his favoritism, the robe. They're going to use it as evidence that a wild animal attacked him. They throw him in a dry cistern, which is like a cell, right? So think and vision. Here's Joseph in his first cell of his life. But it's not immediately life-threatening. It's just he's stuck here. He can't do anything. They take his robe, they may bloody it up, and they're going to take it to show Dad. Now, we're going to probably deal with other pieces of the story. So we're going to go real quick forward to later on, 20 years or so later on. Joseph is now in charge of Egypt, next to Pharaoh. His brothers arrive. Now, one thing I was intrigued that I thought that Lucado did differently than the story reads was, he talks about how the brothers come to Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
In the Bible, the brothers don't really recognize Joseph right away. Joseph's the one that recognizes them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can attribute that to God putting blinders on him. We can attribute that to Joseph probably having gone from being 12 or 13 to now being in his 30s. The reality is he's probably a little more difficult to look at and recognize for sure as the same person. His older brothers who went from being 20 or 22 to being 40, well, they're older, but they were already adults when he last saw them. So and of course they come in a group of 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty easy to look around and go, these are my brothers. But when he sees them, what does Joseph say to him? What does Joseph say to him?
Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. Where have you heard that before?
Everywhere.
Jesus says it.
Yes, and the multitude of times Jesus says it. That's what I was thinking about. You're right. You're right.
The angel says it.
Yes. The angel
True.
says it when Jesus is born, and
Yeah.
Jesus says it how many times? Don't be afraid. Now, there's advice we have trouble with, right? There's advice that gets challenging. Don't be afraid.
I think throughout our life, that's what we have to keep reminding ourselves. That's what Jesus says to us.
Yeah, don't be afraid. You know, but here it is. Joseph says to him, don't be afraid. The angel said that Jesus says it. Repetitively, scripture tells us, don't be afraid.
Right.
Now, there's some interesting things to think about with that. Because all of us are afraid of something or some things. We just are. First of all, the Bible encourages us to be fearful. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, right? So we don't fear God, we don't have wisdom. So, but there's a difference between having a respect for something and being totally afraid. You know, there's a difference between being totally afraid in a situation and being nervous for the unknown. And those are very different things. So don't be afraid. And then he says, what's the next thing Joseph says to his brothers?
I'll provide for you.
Yeah, but even before that, he says something else that I think is important in telling.
Oh, okay. Well, what they meant for evil, God meant for good.
Yes. And even before that, the question, am I in the place of God?
Yeah, right. Am I in the place of God?
Am I in the place of God? Do I get to be the one who judges this? You know, he's at this point, Joseph's able to go, yeah, God's using this for good. As you said, Eileen,
Right.
you guys meant this to be a bad and evil thing. But here we are 20 years later, and what it is what's going to save you. Because instead of starving to death and dying out, you're now going to be able to eat and have food. God used their non-pure motives. Because let's not mistake this. Even Reuben had no pure motives here, right?
Right.
This was not, Reuben didn't see the point in going to the place of killing him, but there was no good motives here. And God took all of that and used it for good. And has saved not just them and their family, which is a huge number of lives at this point. If you can think about this, because the 12 brothers, you can imagine how many children there were and all that at this point. At this point, it's possible that some of his brothers have grandchildren themselves. I mean, you know, so all of these people, think about all of them being saved because of this. God's way ahead of us on the timeline. I mean, some of us pride ourselves and try hard to think ahead. Some of us are really like to believe, you know, we have a plan, you know, have a plan B or C, always ready with something else if this doesn't work the way we're thinking it should or we're hoping it will. God's even way out in front of that. God is so far out in front of that.
And God also gave Joseph a personality of administration. I mean, that's why
Oh, yeah.
Pharaoh lifted him up so quickly in a short period of time, considering he was not an Egyptian.
Yeah, and Pharaoh had a different view of the dreams.
That's
And we
true.
will, I think we will get to look into that at some point. But Pharaoh took a different view of the dreams.
Yeah.
He understood them as prophetic. You know, Joseph's brothers and even Jacob, in a way, saw them as, well, you know, a little egotism on Joseph's part, at least at some level. But God is so far ahead of us, you know, that, you know, the bad becomes a blessing. And God understood that that's eventually where we were going to go from these circumstances. There were a couple phrases that Max Lucado used that just resonated for me. Not just survive, but thrive.
Yep.
They ought to make that into bookmarks or plaques or something.
They probably do.
Yeah, I'm always a day late with that stuff. You know, it's like I thought about publishing What Would Jesus Do like 3 weeks after it hit the, you know, it came out on mugs. You know, what can I say? You know, but think about that. You know, if we really process that, don't just survive, but thrive.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with our perspective on how we look at things, what we do with situations, how we react to situations.
The
You
one
know-
thing, sorry.
No, please.
One thing that I wrote down that he said that I thought was really important, and he said, it won't be painless and it won't be quick, but you will get through this.
Absolutely. Yes.
Does that speak to us?
I believe so.
Well, in the short term and in the long term, right?
Right.
I mean, does that not, I mean, as all of us look back on life, does that not describe life?
Yeah.
It will not be painless. It will not be quick. We will get through it.
Right.
So,
I think
But
think of-
unfortunately, there are people in our situation today or the last 2 months, 3 months, whatever,
Yeah.
having real problems and getting through. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
now they're talking about suicide and they're talking about more alcoholism,
sure.
mistreatment in the home.
Yeah, the domestic abuse hotlines are full, a lot more full, and they have gotten more so in the last number of weeks than they were in the beginning. But yes, all of that, and you know, it has to do with, you know, our angst about what all's going on and how we view that. And I will confess to you, in my, I guess it was the second of my hospital stays this last time around, a very nice lady came into my room. She's with the home health there, but I was in a snit. I'd had a really bad night, and I was in a snit, and I knew I was in a snit. Now, I think most of you have never been subjected to me in a snit. It's not a good thing. And in fact, one of the things I've tried to learn is to isolate myself when I am like that, because nothing good will come of it. And I knew I was in a snit. And she came in and she said something that was relatively harmless and docile, except that, as we all know, Kevin was in a snit. And Kevin pretty much let that be known. And, you know, at the end of which, and part of my snit was that things weren't making sense. One person tells me this, then the next person behaves like that, and the next person tells me this. I like when things make sense, and I can put them together. And I said that to this lady, and she very nicely said to me, and I thought this was incredibly calm of her under the circumstances, about, well, you must really struggle with God then. And you're enjoying that way too much, Eileen. And I looked at her and I said, oh, not at all. Because I understand how wise God is. And when God does things that don't make sense to me, I just know he's smarter than me. But in all due honesty, I'm not conceding that anybody in this hospital's smarter than me. And when they don't make sense, it bugs me. And she was like, oh, okay. But I thought it was a really response of hers to say, well, that must be really hard with God. And I think and I confess that to you and entertain you with that story, kind of as a framework for this to say, that's why so many people, I think, right now are struggling so bad, because we aren't connected to God.
Right.
We don't understand that about God.
Amen.
Don't understand that God's thoughts are bigger than our thoughts.
Right.
God's ways are bigger than our ways. That God knows more stuff. That God's got a long-term picture. That that God has me even in this awful time.
Yes.
That's how we get through it.
There are some people who have very short fuses. We went to the grocery store today and a man didn't realize he had to have a mask, and he was walking across the parking lot swearing up a storm.
Right. Well, if he didn't know that today,
Yeah.
he's really isolated.
Yeah.
But no, how we deal with the circumstances, how we react to the situation, all of that is kind of predicated on not just our worldview, but our universe view, right? When God is creator, when God is in charge, then I get that in some ways, and we can get through. But as we've isolated ourselves from that or removed ourselves from that, we no longer know. It's some of what, when I subject myself to being entertained by what passes for news, one of the questions that's out there that people aren't asking directly, but I think drives them, who's in charge?
Yeah.
Well, see, I know who's in charge.
Yeah.
And so I can be pretty confident about ultimately how this ends up. One day, 30 years ago, I walked into a post office. The man behind the counter was having a terrible day. Not because I was there, lest you reference the earlier story, but he was having a bad day. And I said to him, well, is it possible it could be worse? And he said, well, I could be dead. And then I did the almost unforgivable. I said, how would that be worse? Because, afterwards I realized that might not have been helpful, and it certainly wasn't pastoral. But I realized the problem was our different worldviews.
Yep.
I don't understand dying as the bad end of the bad end of my day.
No, me neither.
Now, Melissa reminds me when I say stuff like that it's not really the best end of one of her days.
Right.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And I'm thankful she thinks that, but because otherwise, but the truth is, for people of faith, if we really take it seriously, that affects how we see and experience all of this. Now, forgive me, folks, as we start to struggle with the second and the third month of being isolated, it isn't easy.
No.
And I understand that, and I recognize that, and all of us are wired differently. But if we can keep turning our eyes up, and if we can keep turning our eyes to Jesus, it gets more tolerable.
Yes, it does.
The one that pertains to all of that, God understands and uses time very differently than we do. When Locato said that really ran around in my head, God does it. And last of all, for anybody who ever plays a lot of card games, God trumps evil.
Amen.
God trumps evil. No matter what we do, no matter how we slice it, no matter what happens,
Yep.
God trumps evil. Folks are often confused by the book of Revelation. And I've heard this from numerous places, and I've said it, and that I've heard various other people in slightly different forms. But I can explain to you in 2 words the entire meaning and breadth of the book of Revelation. God wins. You know how all that imagery gets confusing, that it can be thick to wade through?
Yeah.
Relax. This is what it means. God wins.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's what's going on here with this piece of Joseph. Well, we're running a lot later, but then again, we had some technical difficulties. I thank you
Yeah.
for persevering. I don't know how, maybe we'll figure it out. We'll hopefully figure it out. And if
Yeah.
you're talking to anybody who's interested in getting in, maybe we can coach in between how that best works.
Yeah,
I
I
think
feel for new people that were trying to get on.
Yeah. I think Tony, as far as the video, I think you're right. We because I'm playing it through Amazon Prime Video because I purchased it. We have to have like this streaming license thing. It's free. It's just it's I just registered it with the church, you know, as far because we're tax exempt. And so that, or I think I can download all the videos and be able to have them on my computer and I can show them then. So we'll try that for next time.
Okay. Well, if you need
Thank you for that.
and I say this because of the truth of it, if you need a dummy person to come on to make sure the video's being broadcast, let me know, Pastor.
I will. Yeah,
So-
I think I'll do that actually.
And, yeah.
One thing we used to do at work when we were working with our dealers across the United States and Canada, we actually set up another monitor in our meeting room so that we knew or we could see what they could see. That was always our proof that, yeah, I guess we're live. Because we said, yeah, that monitor's on and that's going, you know, out
Okay.
and back into us. We said, okay, we're good. When that didn't show, we knew we had technical problems. But I mean, that's an extra piece of hardware to get.
We are still recording, Pastor.
Yep. So I guess we could stop the recording then, right? Or
Yep, you're the host now.
oh, I'm the host.
I turned it over to you.
Remember, you wanted to serve coffee and donuts?